3 days after my wife's funeral, I was putting away her last belongings when my daughter Megan showed up at the door with a folder of documents. "Dad, you need to leave. This house is mine now." She didn't even blink when she said it. I looked at the papers in her hand, then at the house I had lived in for 40 years. The betrayal from the daughter I had raised with so much love was right there, cold as ice, kicking me out of my own home. But what she didn't know is that just 3 days later, she would come to my door begging for help. Let me tell you how this twist ends. But before we continue, help us grow by subscribing to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Thomas Harlan, 74 years old, retired civil engineer in Lakeview Oaks, North Carolina. I spent 42 years building bridges and roads all over the state, always sticking to the same principles. My father taught me that a man is only as good as his word and the work he delivers. I never accuse without knowing the facts. Helen used to joke that I was way too meticulous, but that precision brought us stability. Moral justice was always the foundation of our family, something I learned in childhood. It's that simple, or at least that's what I believed. Helen and I built our life brick by brick, no rush, but with a lot of purpose. She managed the family finances with a level of organization that would impress any accountant. While I calculated concrete strength, she planned our investments and savings. We worked like a perfect team, each one contributing their own skills. Sundays were sacred at our house, family lunch, talks in the backyard. Helen made the best pot roast in North Carolina, at least in my opinion. They were simple times, but now I see they were the happiest of my life. Megan was always our little princess, our only daughter, the center of our world. We gave her everything she asked for: private college, study abroad in Europe, a new car when she graduated. She studied public relations and was always articulate, smart, full of ambition. When she married Chad, a financial consultant from Charlotte, we were proud. It seemed like we had raised an independent and successful young woman. Every Sunday she'd come over for dinner, telling us about work, her plans for the future. She was the kind of daughter any father would be proud of. I've always valued 3 things above all else: integrity, honest work, and family loyalty. My father built our reputation with sweat and honesty, and I kept that tradition going. Helen shared those same values, creating a home based on mutual trust. We taught Megan that family is sacred. It's where you can always return. Dignity and respect were fundamental pillars in how we raised her. I believe those principles were unshakable in our home. But sometimes we find out not everyone around us sees things the same way. In the first days after the funeral, I noticed small changes around the house that really bothered me. Megan would show up unannounced, go through Helen's things, and reorganize entire cabinets. When I asked what she was doing, she said it was to help keep things in order. She started bringing Chad along, and the 2 of them would whisper about documents and paperwork. I felt like something was off, but I couldn't quite figure out what. It was like I had suddenly become a guest in my own home. That feeling of being invaded grew stronger with each of their visits. A week later, I tried using my credit card at the grocery store, and it was declined. I called the bank and found out the account had been frozen, at the request of a family member. When I confronted Megan, she said it was a precaution because I had been confused since Mom passed. Chad stood next to her, nodding like he fully agreed. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation that I couldn't even put into words. It was my money, my account, but suddenly I had no access to anything. The family manipulation had begun, quiet and calculated. Around the same time, my health insurance was canceled without anyone telling me. I only found out when I tried to renew a prescription, and the pharmacist told me the plan was inactive. Megan claimed it was part of a necessary financial reorganization and that I should trust her. Real estate agents started showing up on our street, asking about the house. Some neighbors told me they had already done walkthroughs in the backyard. When I asked about it, she said it was just routine insurance evaluations. I knew she was lying, but I still hadn't grasped the full extent of what was happening. The last straw came when she brought over papers for me to sign, claiming it was for my own protection. It was a guardianship request, arguing that I was mentally confused after Helen's death. I looked at those documents and saw my daughter treating me like I was incapable. Chad was sitting in my favorite chair, scrolling through his phone like everything was totally normal. Megan tapped her fingers on the table, waiting for my signature. I pushed the papers back to her and said firmly, "No." It was the first time I saw genuine surprise on her face. That night, after they left, I kept thinking about Megan's reaction when I refused to sign. It was like she didn't expect any pushback from me, like I was just supposed to go along with everything silently. I started wondering what other documents she had and why she was in such a rush. The next day, I called the lawyer who handled Helen's will. The secretary told me something that froze my blood. "Mr. Harlan, you didn't attend the will reading last week." I had never been informed of any will reading. My own daughter had deliberately kept me out of the most important meeting of my life. I scheduled an urgent meeting with the lawyer, Dr. Peterson, for the next morning. When I got to the office, he looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Thomas, your daughter said you were too shaken up and preferred that she represent your interests." I explained I had never authorized any of that and demanded to know the actual contents of the will. What he showed me left me completely shocked. Helen had left 70% of all assets, and the house, directly to me. Megan's portion was much smaller and included a specific clause I had never seen before. Dr. Peterson read the clause aloud carefully. "The inheritance of Megan Harlan Faulkner is conditional upon her respect for and care of her father, Thomas Harlan, for the remainder of his life. If she attempted to harm me in any way, she would automatically forfeit her inheritance." Helen had foreseen exactly what was happening and created a legal safeguard for me. The fake version of the will Megan had been trying to push was starting to come into focus. My wife had left everything clearly documented, but my daughter had completely manipulated the situation. She kept me away from the official reading so she could lie about the true content. I left the office with a notarized copy of the real will and my mind boiling with anger. Megan hadn't just lied about the inheritance. She had forged documents to convince me. I called a private investigator that an engineer colleague had recommended years ago, Elaine Grant. Elaine had been a federal prosecutor before opening her own agency in Raleigh. When I explained the situation over the phone, she said family fraud cases were more common than I'd think. We scheduled a meeting for the next day at her office. I was beginning to realize I needed professional help to deal with this. At the meeting with Elaine, I brought all the documents I'd managed to gather: the real will, Megan's forged papers, bank statements. Elaine went through everything with a surgeon's precision and made an observation that deeply unsettled me. "Thomas, your wife was moving very large amounts of money in recent years. Did you know that?" She showed me transactions I had never seen before, transfers to companies I didn't recognize. Some of these businesses had generic names and suspicious addresses in cities we had never visited. It was as if Helen had a completely secret financial life running parallel to ours. Elaine suggested we bring in an investigator specialized in financial crimes, someone with real experience in money laundering. She knew Frank Bolton, a former federal agent who now worked as a private consultant in Charlotte. Frank reviewed the documents with the sharp eye of someone who had seen this kind of case before. He identified clear patterns of laundering activity, shell companies, multiple transfers, strategically split amounts. "Your wife was involved in something big, Thomas. And judging by the pattern, she was probably cooperating with federal authorities." That would explain the extreme secrecy Helen had kept around our finances in recent years. Frank made a few discreet calls to former contacts at the FBI and uncovered some stunning information. Helen had been an official IRS informant for at least 5 consecutive years. She was helping track a complex tax evasion network involving financial consultants in the area. The name Chad Faulkner, my son-in-law, appeared in some of the investigation's preliminary reports. Helen wasn't laundering money. She was helping dismantle a sophisticated laundering scheme. And Chad, my daughter's husband, was at the center of the entire criminal operation. Suddenly, Megan's desperate rush to keep me away from the documents made total sense. As the investigation went deeper, Frank discovered that Megan most likely knew about her husband's criminal involvement. She was desperately trying to cover up evidence that could implicate Chad and destroy their lives. The family manipulation she had been using against me was part of a much bigger plan. If she could have me declared legally incompetent and take full control of the inheritance, she could destroy every incriminating document. My daughter wasn't just trying to steal my rightful inheritance. She was trying to protect her criminal husband at my expense, using my status as a grieving widower against me. Frank showed me how the IRS's federal operation was still fully active and ongoing. The agents were specifically looking for the documents Helen had kept hidden in our house. Those papers you mentioned, the old folder you took with you when you left, could be the key to everything. When I opened Helen's folder in front of him, we found copies of detailed fraudulent contracts. There were records of suspicious transfers and a full list of names that included Chad. Helen had saved enough evidence to take down the entire criminal network, and Megan knew it, which is why she was so desperate to push me out. That Friday, Frank called with a proposal that would completely change the course of everything. Thomas, the FBI wants to make an official deal with you. They'll help you recover your inheritance and protect you from your daughter. In return, I would cooperate by providing all the evidence Helen had collected over the years. It was my real chance to get justice and expose the elaborate inheritance scam. The FBI was ready to launch an operation to catch Megan and Chad in the act. Saturday at 7 p.m., we had a meeting that would decide all of our fates forever. On Saturday morning, I arrived at the FBI office in Charlotte with Helen's folder under my arm. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez welcomed me into a small room with glass walls. She examined each document carefully, sorting them into 3 separate piles. The authentication process would take at least 6 hours, she explained. And now, I was more certain than ever. The operation against Chad and his network depended on this evidence. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had real allies. Agent Martinez showed me a spreadsheet detailing the money Chad had moved, $2.8 million. The transactions followed a clear pattern, always amounts under $10,000. She needed at least 48 hours to cross-reference the data with other ongoing investigations. The problem was that Megan could start destroying evidence if she got suspicious. But the numbers didn't lie. We had a very small window before they caught on. The pressure of time made every decision critical. Frank Bolton arrived at the office carrying 2 folders packed with documents. He had found records of at least 12 shell companies tied to Chad. The cost to investigate each one would be $15,000. Still, each case would take a week, and we didn't have that kind of time. And Frank was building a solid case. Federal bureaucracy was slow, but necessary to ensure nothing could be challenged later. Every passing hour increased my anxiety about Megan. The chain of custody required me to sign 17 different forms. Agent Martinez explained that any failure in this process could invalidate everything in court. She'd seen millions of dollars lost over a single missing stamp. The federal protocol was strict, but it was our only guarantee of justice. And they were building a bulletproof certainty. The patience I'd learned building bridges would be essential now. Every document I signed brought me closer to the justice Helen deserved. The FBI needed a full list of all assets involved in the inheritance. I spent 2 hours detailing every bank account, every investment, even Helen's jewelry. The total value came to $1.2 million, far more than I'd imagined. I found out that 3 accounts had already been emptied by Megan the previous week. But the transfers were fully documented. She had stolen nearly $300,000 while I was still mourning. The anger I felt at that moment nearly made me call her. Agent Martinez warned me that confronting Megan directly would be the worst possible mistake. We had to keep the element of surprise if we wanted to recover the money and arrest everyone involved. She'd seen too many cases ruined by impatient families. The protocol required strategic patience, even when every fiber of my being wanted confrontation. And now we had more facts than we could ignore. Waiting would be the hardest part of this entire operation. But I had learned to build bridges with patience. On Monday, Frank called me with a discovery that changed everything. He had found a photo of Chad entering a bank in Atlanta. The photo was taken at the exact moment he was making a $100,000 deposit. The timestamp showed March 15th, 3 days before Helen died. But that image was worth more than 1,000 words. The problem was, we needed more evidence to prove a direct connection. One photo alone wouldn't be enough to convict anyone in court. Agent Martinez managed to get a receipt showing the origin of the $100,000. It came from a transfer out of Megan's business account, straight into Chad's deposit. That meant my daughter was directly involved in the laundering scheme. She wasn't just an ignorant wife, she was an active accomplice. We found out the account had been closed the day after the deposit. and each new fact made the case even more complex. They were smarter and more criminal than I had ever imagined. Frank brought a screenshot of a conversation between Chad and someone named Marcus. In the messages, Chad mentioned the old man and the need to clean the house. They were talking about me. I was the old man that needed to be taken out. The date of the chat was 2 days after Helen's funeral, but it was clear they were planning to get rid of me. The family manipulation wasn't improvisation. It was part of a calculated plan. They had turned my grief into an opportunity for even greater crimes. The second screenshot showed Megan asking Chad if it was safe to use the old lady's documents. The way she referred to Helen as the old lady made my blood boil. My own daughter was plotting to use her dead mother's papers as blackmail. Her coldness was nauseating. She treated Helen like disposable property. And now the facts showed me I had raised a monster. Megan no longer had anything left of the girl I once knew. She had become something unrecognizable and despicable. We discovered they had a specific timeline to get everything done. They wanted to complete the inheritance transfer by the end of the month. That gave us just 2 weeks to build the entire operation and catch them in the act. The FBI needed at least 10 days to prepare equipment and position agents. The window was closing fast. But sometimes the truth isn't enough if you're too late. We had to move fast without sacrificing the precision of the operation. Frank revealed that he had a source inside the bank where Chad kept his accounts. The branch manager, a former FBI colleague, was willing to cooperate by providing unofficial records. He got us copies of 3 suspicious transfers made the previous week, totaling $250,000. The problem was, this evidence couldn't be used in court without a warrant. But sometimes the most valuable facts are the ones you can't officially use. Still, they pointed us in the right direction to find legal evidence. It was like having a treasure map. On Wednesday, Agent Martinez called me with the confirmation we'd been waiting for. The lab had authenticated all of Helen's documents as legitimate. She really had been an official IRS informant, registered under code CI 4471NC. The papers I was carrying were copies of genuine federal documents. The report confirmed that Helen had provided information that led to the seizure of $1.8 million. And now we had federal certification of my wife's heroism. She wasn't a criminal. She was a hero of American law. The call from the federal prosecutor came on Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. They would charge Chad with money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Megan would be indicted for family extortion, document forgery, and attempted fraud. The sentences could reach up to 15 years in federal prison for each of them. But the truth was now officially sealed. Frank explained to me that cases like this had a 94% conviction rate. The American justice machine was finally working in my favor. The official confirmation came via fax to Frank's office. Operation Family Betrayal was approved for immediate execution. They had assigned 6 special agents to the operation, including 2 specialists. The approved budget was $85,000 for equipment. The date was set, Friday at 7 p.m., at my former home. And they had every fact lined up. Every detail of the operation was calculated to ensure there were no mistakes. The military-level precision of the plan gave me confidence. We had exactly 36 hours to prepare everything down to the smallest detail. The agents would install microphones in the living room and hidden cameras in the yard. I would wear a special transmitter taped to my chest to ensure perfect audio. Frank taught me how to guide the conversation to draw out clear confessions from both of them. And now, they would give me facts on tape. The moment of truth was coming faster than I imagined. Friday would be the day my daughter found out who her father really was. Agent Martinez gave me the final script for the operation. I was to let them make the threats first, then bring up Helen's documents. That would be the moment when they'd reveal their true intentions and confess their crimes. She warned me it would be the hardest conversation of my life. The recording equipment would capture every word, every pause, every lie. And in less than 2 days, I'd have more than enough. The trap was set, and they had no idea what was coming. The final briefing took place Thursday night at Frank's office. He showed me photos of the house with the equipment already installed. 3 microphones in the living room, 2 cameras disguised as potted plants, a surveillance van parked 2 blocks away. The plan was simple. Let them talk, record everything, give the signal when we had enough confessions. And in 22 hours, I'd have more facts than I knew what to do with. The engineering of revenge was complete, every piece in the right place. Friday would be the day justice finally came to the Harlan family. Friday arrived like a runaway train, and by 5 p.m. I was inside the FBI surveillance van. Agent Martinez showed me the monitors, 3 screens showing different angles of my former home. I could see the living room where Helen and I used to watch movies on Sunday nights. The microphones picked up even the sound of the wind against the windows. And now I would have high-definition certainty. The equipment was working flawlessly. Every word would be recorded with crystal clarity. Just 2 hours remained until the moment that would define the rest of my life. At 6:30, Megan pulled up in that white BMW I helped finance. Chad stepped out from the passenger side, carrying a brown leather folder. They chatted cheerfully at the front door, like they were planning a vacation. Frank pointed at the monitor and whispered, "They have no idea what's coming." And in 30 minutes I would have more facts than I could process. The irony hit me like a punch. They were walking into Helen's house, the same Helen they thought they could use as blackmail against me. I walked through the front door at exactly 7 p.m., just as planned. Megan was sitting in Helen's armchair, scrolling through her phone with that usual arrogance. Chad had taken the couch where I used to read the paper on Saturday mornings. The house smelled different. They had even changed the air freshener Helen always used. But I could feel the tension in the air. They had plans, and so did I. The difference was, I knew their plans, but they had no clue about mine. "Dad, glad you came," Megan said without even looking up from her phone. Chad greeted me with a nod, like I was some distant acquaintance. They had rearranged the entire living room. The photos of Helen were tucked away in a box in the corner. The table where she used to do her crossword puzzles was now covered in papers and contracts. And the facts were scattered right in front of me. I sat in the chair they had clearly prepared for me, isolated, with my back to the window. It was a psychologically disadvantageous position, and they knew it. Chad opened the leather folder and spread documents across the table with calculated movements. "Thomas, we brought some papers to simplify this whole complicated situation," he said with that fake smile. I immediately recognized some of the forms. They were the same guardianship papers I had already refused to sign. Others were new: property transfers, power of attorney forms, even a donation agreement. And I was seeing more than enough to stop pretending. They had put together a full-blown operation to rob me legally. The sophistication of the scheme was both impressive and terrifying. "The situation is simple, Dad," Megan finally said, lifting her eyes from her phone. "You sign these papers today, or tomorrow everyone's going to hear about Mom's dirty dealings." She said it with a coldness that froze me to the bone. Chad added, "We've got documents showing some very suspicious transactions, Thomas. It would be a shame to tarnish Helen's memory." And now I knew for sure my daughter was capable of anything. They were ready to destroy a dead woman's reputation just to rob a widower. The family blackmail had hit its lowest, most disgusting point. It was my cue to begin the performance Frank had rehearsed with me. "What kind of documents do you have?" I asked, faking nervousness in my voice. Megan and Chad exchanged a triumphant glance. They thought I had taken the bait. "Suspicious bank transfers, Dad. Mom was involved in some pretty ugly stuff." Chad pulled out a separate folder and showed me a few papers. And they were about to hand me all the facts, on tape. The moment of truth had arrived, and they had no idea they were digging their own graves. Every word that came out of their mouths would be used against them in court. "Take a look," Chad said, pointing to a bank statement. "Your wife received $50,000 from a company called Atlantic Holdings in March." He paused dramatically before continuing. "That company doesn't exist, Thomas. It's a front for money laundering." Megan added, "If this gets out, the family's reputation will be destroyed forever." And they had just handed me the most important ones. Atlantic Holdings was one of the companies the FBI was actively investigating. Helen had indeed received money from them, as a federal government informant. But they didn't know that, and I couldn't tell them yet. Pretending to be shaken, I asked, "Are there more companies like that?" It was like opening a floodgate. Chad and Megan started listing company after company, each more incriminating than the last, in their minds at least. Meridian Consulting, South Point Investments, Carolina Financial Services, Chad listed proudly, showing off his knowledge. All shell companies, Dad, Megan added. And they were giving me a full confession without realizing it. Every company they mentioned was part of the federal investigation. They were revealing detailed knowledge of the criminal network Helen had helped dismantle. How much do you want to keep this secret? I asked, following the script. That question was music to their ears. Smiles appeared on both their faces instantly. It's not about money, Dad, Megan lied. It's about protecting the family. Chad was more direct. You sign everything over to Megan, and these documents disappear forever. And they had just confessed to extortion, crystal clear on audio. Frank had warned me this would be the critical moment. They had crossed the legal line completely, turning blackmail into a federal crime. The FBI now had everything it needed to arrest them. I took a deep breath and said the line Frank had prepared. Maybe we should talk about all of Helen's papers. The reaction was instant. Chad and Megan looked at each other with worry. What papers? Chad asked, trying to stay calm. The ones she kept in the brown folder, I said, watching their expressions change. And I could see on their faces they knew exactly which papers I meant. The folder Helen kept locked in the study. The folder I had taken with me when I left the house. The folder that held the full truth about her work with the federal government. You shouldn't mess with that stuff, Thomas, Chad said with a threatening tone. Megan was more direct. Those papers could hurt you too, Dad. You were married to her. They were trying to scare me, but I could see the panic growing in their eyes. Maybe we should look through them together, I said, reaching for my own folder. And I was about to show them facts that would change everything. Chad stood up nervously as he saw my folder. Megan stopped scrolling her phone for the first time that evening. They knew something was wrong, but they still didn't know what. I opened the folder slowly and pulled out the first document, an official IRS letter on government letterhead. Did you know Helen was a federal informant? I asked, watching the shock spread across their faces. I read only the first 2 lines. Dear Mrs. Harlan, we confirm your status as confidential informant CI 4471NC. I stopped reading and carefully closed the document. And this was only the first of many facts they needed to face. The silence in the room was deafening. Chad had gone completely pale, and Megan looked like she had stopped breathing. It was time to continue this conversation with an impartial witness present. This can't be real, Chad stammered, trying to process what he was hearing. Megan was in shock. Mom was working for the government? I could see the panic rising in their eyes. The entire blackmail scheme they had planned was built on a lie. She wasn't laundering money, I said calmly, putting the document away. But you already know that, don't you? And I could see in their eyes that they knew far more than they had admitted. Chad began to sweat heavily. He understood that if Helen was an informant, she had information on him. The trap had sprung, and they were beginning to realize they were the prey. The hunter had become the hunted. Megan tried to regain control of the situation. That doesn't change anything, Dad. You still need to sign the papers. But her voice was trembling. Gone was the arrogant confidence from before. Chad was more nervous. Thomas, let's work this out civilly. We can make a deal. They were still trying to salvage the con, even as it collapsed. And I could see it in their eyes. They knew they were finished. Desperation was taking over. It was like watching 2 criminals realize the trap had fully closed around them. They had planned everything, except for the possibility that I might know more than I let on. You really thought you could blackmail the husband of a federal informant? I asked, watching the panic deepen in their eyes. Chad tried one last move. Thomas, this is crazy. Let's burn those papers and forget all of this. Megan was shaking. Dad, we didn't know. We can fix this as a family. But it was too late for regrets or bargaining. And now I had more than enough facts for a lifetime. I picked up my phone and started typing a message. They watched my every move with growing terror. The moment of truth was coming faster than any of us expected. I showed them the phone screen, a simple message written, but not yet sent. Chad read it out loud. Now. His voice was completely broken. Megan asked in panic, What does that mean, Dad? I smiled for the first time since Helen's funeral, and I was more certain than I had ever been in my life. I placed my finger over the send button. Chad tried to approach me. "Thomas, don't do this." Megan began to cry. This was exactly how I wanted them to see themselves. Powerless. Desperate. Realizing they no longer had control over anything. Justice was one touch away. "You destroyed your own family," I said, looking into each of their eyes. "Helen was a hero, and you tried to turn her into a criminal." Chad fell to his knees. "Please, Thomas, we'll give everything back." Megan pleaded through tears. "Dad, I'm sorry. We didn't know about Mom." But the apologies came far too late, and every fact was now on the table. I pressed the send button. The message was delivered instantly. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and leaned back in the chair. In a few minutes, they would learn what it meant to cross Thomas Harlan. True justice was coming for the Harlan family. Within minutes, I heard the sound of cars pulling up in front of the house. Chad rushed to the window and went pale when he saw the FBI vehicles. "What did you do?" Megan screamed in panic. 3 black vans parked along the street, followed by a truck from the local news station. And now the facts had official badges. The TV cameras were already rolling when Frank stepped out of the second van. It was exactly as we had planned. A public arrest, with the entire community watching. The front door opened, and federal agents entered the living room. "Megan Harlan Faulkner and Chad Faulkner, you are under arrest for family extortion," Agent Martinez announced. The handcuffs gleamed under the living room light as they were taken into custody. Chad tried to argue, "This is a misunderstanding." But the recordings didn't lie, and the FBI had 47 minutes of recorded confessions. My daughter looked at me with pure hatred as the cuffs were placed on her wrists. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk as Chad and Megan were escorted to the squad cars. Dorothy Pemberton, who had known Megan since childhood, covered her mouth in shock. The cameras captured every moment. The daughter who tried to rob her widowed father. Chad tried to hide his face with his cuffed hands, but it was no use. And now all of Lakeview Oaks would know every one of them. The white BMW was towed away as evidence. Sirens echoed through the quiet neighborhood as the criminals were taken away. Frank handed me an official copy of the arrest warrant while the tech team collected evidence. 17 federal charges each, he said with professional satisfaction. Family extortion, forgery of public documents, attempted fraud of a federal inheritance. The penalties could reach up to 20 years in prison for both of them. The attorney I had hired arrived half an hour later with reinstatement documents. And now I had more than enough to reclaim everything. The house, the bank accounts, even Helen's jewelry that Megan had sold. 3 weeks later, I sat in federal court in Charlotte, watching my daughter and son-in-law stand trial. The public prosecutor played the recordings where they confessed to their crimes in detail. The defense tried to argue lack of awareness, but the evidence was overwhelming. Chad had laundered $2.8 million through shell companies. Megan had stolen $300,000 from the inheritance while I was mourning, and the court was hearing every one of them on tape. Federal Judge James Morrison showed no sympathy for the criminals. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said during closing arguments, "the defendants tried to destroy a 74-year-old man using family blackmail." He played the audio clip where Megan referred to Helen as the old lady. The look of disgust on the jurors' faces was unmistakable. The case against Chad for money laundering was even stronger, and the facts presented were irrefutable. Helen had helped the government map the entire criminal network. The defense had no argument against certified federal evidence. Judge Morrison officially acknowledged the fraud committed against me and my estate. Mr. Harlan was the victim of a criminal conspiracy orchestrated by his own family members. The sentence was clear. Chad was given 15 years for money laundering. Megan received 12 years for family extortion and inheritance fraud. The court ordered full restitution of all stolen funds, plus interest. And the federal court had now confirmed every one of mine. I was officially reinstated as the sole rightful heir to all of Helen's assets. After the sentencing, I was escorted to the judge's chambers to sign the documents. "Mr. Harlan, I deeply regret what your family has done to you," Judge Morrison told me. The total amount recovered reached $1.4 million, including interest and penalties. Chad's shell companies were dissolved, and all assets were transferred to me. And now I had federal documents confirming my innocence. Helen's reputation was also officially restored as a hero of the law. The state of North Carolina issued a public statement honoring her contribution. As I was leaving the courthouse, Megan caught up with me on the front steps. She was in handcuffs, escorted by 2 federal agents, but asked to speak with me. "Dad, please," she said with tears in her eyes. "I didn't know about Mom. Forgive me." For a moment I saw the little girl I had raised with so much love, but some facts are undeniable. She had humiliated me, stolen my inheritance, and tried to destroy Helen's memory. The plea for forgiveness had come far too late to change anything. I looked into her eyes for several long seconds before answering. "Megan, you had plenty of chances to do the right thing." My voice was calm, but as firm as reinforced concrete. "When your mother died, I needed support, not blackmail." She tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand, and I was certain of every word I was about to say. "You chose money over family. You chose lies over honoring your mother." The agents began leading her toward the squad car. "Dad, I can change," she shouted as she was being led away. "When I get out of prison, we can start over." But I slowly shook my head. "No, Megan. You buried your own name." The words echoed down the courthouse steps like a final sentence. Chad tried to say something, but I didn't even look at him. And I was certain I never wanted to see them again. They had destroyed any possibility of reconciliation the moment they chose to blackmail me. The Harlan family died the day they walked into my house. The doors of the squad car shut, and I watched my daughter begin her 12-year sentence. Reporters surrounded me asking for a statement, but all I said was, "Justice has been served." Frank Bolton approached and shook my hand. "Thomas, you're the bravest man I've ever met." Agent Martinez handed me a folder with all the documents from the case, and now I had a library of certified truth. I walked to my new car, a blue Buick I bought with the recovered money. For the first time in months, I drove home knowing it was truly mine. That night, I sat in Helen's armchair with a cup of the coffee she used to make. The house was quiet, but it was the silence of peace, not loneliness. Her photos were back in their place of honor. The official IRS portrait had arrived that morning, Helen in uniform, recognized as a federal informant. And now all of Lakeview Oaks knew the truth about my wife. The neighbors had apologized for their initial doubt. Dorothy Pemberton brought over a chocolate cake, Helen's favorite. 6 months later, I founded the Helen Harlan Foundation to support widowers who were victims of family fraud. The money recovered from Chad funded a legal assistance center, families who had gone through what I had now found guidance and support. Helen's story as a federal informant became a teaching case at FBI academies. And now I help others uncover their own. Frank Bolton became the foundation's director. His federal experience was invaluable. The house in Lakeview Oaks became the headquarters of the entire operation. A few months after Megan's arrest, I hired a renovation crew to completely transform the house. I tore down the wall between the living room and the study, creating a wide, open space filled with light. The kitchen got granite countertops and modern appliances. Everything Helen had always wanted. The master bedroom was repainted in a soft blue she had picked out from a magazine. And I was certain she would have approved of the changes. The house was no longer a mausoleum of memories. It was a renewed home. Every renovation erased traces of betrayal and rebuilt our love story. The Helen Harlan Foundation has grown beyond my most optimistic expectations in recent months. We've helped 247 seniors who were victims of family fraud across North Carolina. Frank Bolton now leads a team of 12 volunteer attorneys and 6 private investigators. The Legal Center handles cases from Charlotte to Asheville, offering free support. And the facts show that family abuse is more common than we think. We've received donations from local businesses and support from the state government. My family's tragedy turned into hope for hundreds of others. Helen would be proud to see her name associated with protecting the vulnerable. Every month I get letters from the federal prison where Megan is serving her 12-year sentence. She writes asking for forgiveness, promising change, begging for a second chance I don't intend to give. Frank reads the letters first and gives me a summary. It's always the same story. I never open the envelopes myself because there's nothing she could say. And I'm certain some bridges can't be rebuilt. The letters go straight into the Foundation's archive as evidence of continued manipulation. Dorothy Pemberton always asks if I don't feel sorry for my own daughter. The answer is always the same. She chose her fate. Last year, I launched a YouTube channel called Justice for Elders, which now has 45,000 subscribers. I tell my story and teach seniors how to spot signs of financial abuse by family members. I speak at universities, churches, and community centers about inheritance rights and asset protection. The events are always packed. People connect deeply with the vulnerability of widowers. And now I share those facts to educate others. The FBI uses my videos in training sessions about family fraud. I've been invited to speak at national conferences on elder crimes. The voice they tried to silence has become impossible to ignore. During my talks, I always show Helen's official IRS photo as a federal informant. "This is my wife," I say proudly to teary-eyed audiences. She risked her life to uphold American law. Her story inspires others to report financial crimes they've witnessed. 3 money laundering operations have been dismantled thanks to tips from people who attended those events. And the facts about Helen continue delivering justice. She's become a symbol of courage in the federal community. Her legacy grew far beyond what she imagined when she chose to cooperate. The woman they tried to label a criminal is now a national role model. Last week, I installed a large portrait of Helen at the foundation's entrance. The bronze plaque reads, "Helen Patricia Harlan, Federal Hero, Informant CI 4471NC. Visitors stop to read about her contributions to American justice. The portrait shows her smiling, confident, brave, exactly as I remember her. And now, everyone knows the truth about my wife. The FBI sent an official letter recognizing her service to the nation. Frank organized a tribute ceremony with local and federal officials. The woman Megan once called the old lady received posthumous military honors. Yesterday, at 76 years old, I recorded my final video for the channel before officially retiring. Sitting in Helen's chair, with her portrait behind me, I reflected on everything we went through. "They tried to erase me from my own family's history," I said, looking straight into the camera. "They tried to turn my love into shame and my wife into a criminal." I paused to sip the coffee she used to make. And I wanted to leave the most important ones on record. "But they found out you don't erase a 76-year-old man that easily." The video already has over 500,000 views and thousands of supportive comments. Today, as I write these memories at the table where Helen used to do crossword puzzles, I look out the window at the garden. The roses we planted together in 1995 bloomed again this spring, more beautiful than ever. The house echoes with laughter from neighborhood grandkids who come visit Grandpa Thomas. Dorothy Pemberton brought chocolate cake, our little tradition for the past few months, and I'm certain I've lived an extraordinary life. They tried to erase me. I became unforgettable. The story that started with betrayal ended in triumph, and the name Harlan once again stands for honor. Helen and I won. Now, I'm curious about you, who just heard my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Meanwhile, I'm leaving one of the channel's most surprising stories right here on the end screen. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.